I never thought that an ordinary evening at the flat of my closest friend would depart myself, doubting everything I believed. I was aware that Chris and I had been the greatest pals from junior high. The type of relationship formed by late-night inside jokes, discussions, and years of getting to know one another. We had grown up next to each other, celebrated birthdays, gave broken care, and letters of acceptance to colleges were opened with open hearts, spent Saturdays watching terrible. We have seen every movie, but never this. That evening began like 100 others. I briefly visited Chris's residence. We were just relaxing on his after 8, half arguing, half throwing back beers on the couch over what to wear later to the bar. Nothing unusual, just loud, our regular position music, a few beverages, and perhaps some dancing if. On one of those nights, we were sufficiently inebriated. You never know what you'll remember, but occasionally, those are the evenings that alter anything. The temperature was warm in one of those slick summers in an apartment evenings when the air is heavy, such as it is putting pressure on your skin. Chris had just returned from working out. Despite changing his shirt, he continued to tug, as if it were suffocating him at the collar. He answered, "All right," and extended his arms. Above his head, "I must take a shower first." "We go." I sense I laughed. "You look disgusted." "Disgusting as well." "Shut up," he retorted, smiling, picking up a towel and leaving. "Stay away from the restroom and don't touch my playlist if it's that depressing when I come out." Again, indie shit. No assurances when I called. He smirked and flipped me off after him, before vanishing over his shoulder behind the door. After a little while, I heard the water and the pipes rattling begin like they always had in his. I collapsed back on the couch in the old building, browsing my phone while feigning to read books, but strangely, none of it was sinking. Something didn't feel quite right. Excitement before the night out. There is a quiet but substantial strain in the air. Shook it off after around 15 minutes. Prior to getting up, I realized I had no idea where my cologne had disappeared. Normally, dropped off a bottle at Chris's because I assumed it had crashed there so frequently. In the cupboard in the bathroom without thinking a lot. I approached and shoved the door open and froze through the shower glass that was foggy. I could see the water streaming from his shape. One hand in his hair and down his back. I had no intention of interrupting him, not like that. But after I did, I was immobile. Simply stood there in full awe. "Dude, I forgot what I'd came in for." Shouted across the lake. "Yes, I apologize for my stutter. I was merely trying to find." He didn't seem affected by my cologne. "Help yourself, I should be in the cabinet." Despite not being able to see me, he nodded. Once more, gaze strayed to the glass. Although the fog was dense, it wasn't dense enough. Could still see how his body went beneath the sea. I seized the bottle, and departed as soon as I could. I sat back on the couch and held it in my hands, while attempting to breathe, persuade myself that wasn't anything. I hadn't given him the kind of look that it wasn't important. Yet my body gave me a different tale, but my features remained attractive. Chest remains constricted. That was the time. I was aware that there was a difference between not yet, but a change had occurred inside of me, and it continued from there. Because he left the door the next time, intentionally unlocked, and I was unable to stop, I couldn't get the thought out of what I would observed. It had only been under a minute. The hazy glass, the bend of the way the water slipped over Chris's shoulder down his back, yet it continued to play in. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It meant nothing, I assured myself. It was just There are moments when best buddies see and forget, but I remembered was unable to, as Chris emerged from the hair remaining damp after being newly styled in the bathroom. A casual towel slung over his neck. He was totally relaxed, as if he flipped, but nothing unusual had happened. On the couch next to me, he grasped his sip and grinned as if everything was. He nodded and murmured, "You smell good, as usual." Smirking in my direction, I muttered, "Cologne," attempting to sound informal in the cupboard. He didn't push, and I was appreciative of that. We jokingly played some music and prepared to. As usual, we went to the pub, but I could still feel something humming inside of me. Similar to a low frequency beneath my skin, I was observing him in a new and worse way. I didn't detest it. The evening went by. The bar was crowded, and the noise was loud. Overpowering. A few drinks have a stronger effect. Chris and I danced more than I had anticipated. We leaned into one another as we laughed. Our words weren't heard above the loud music. Signify a lot, yet our bodies communicated. Otherwise, his hand continued to rest on my back. Then my arm ought to have been brushed, as though I had to feel it against his chest. That relationship was nothing more than after midnight. It wasn't nothing either. We staggered back to where he was, felt looser, darker, and softer. It wasn't awkward between us. It was we fell onto the couch, electrified, off our shoes and extended our legs, and eased up, tilting my head back, and I felt his thighs' warm pressure. We remained that way longer against me than normal, and then Chris suddenly got to his feet, stretched and whispered, "Consider that I smell like perspiration, so please rinse me off again. Bar smoke." I watched him head and nodded. I believed he closed the door to the restroom. Door behind him, but it remained cracked. But not so much that I could observe enough to determine that it wasn't an accident. My heartbeat accelerated, and I gazed at the ceiling, then the door, and finally the floor. Perhaps he neglected to go toward it in the corridor. Perhaps I was seeing things in my head. Was only in my mind, however, after hearing the gentle sound of the water running again, passing through the walls, and something changed inside me that I can't recall. Making the choice. I can't recall considering the repercussions. I ended up standing there and my hand resting on the bathroom in the hallway. I pushed the door open with a shaky gasp. Gently, the steam struck me first, followed by the water's sound, followed by Chris in the shower with his back to the window, water dripping down his neck. I appreciate you continuing the narrative thus far. If you like it, please leave a remark below. It truly enables us to develop and achieve more. Listeners such as yourself. Let's go back to. He cocked his head slightly, but not his hand was shocked, not angry, but calm. Slid through his hair again while he gazed not quite over his shoulder, but his voice was barely silent. Just enough. Lost by the shower's roar, I forgot something. I entered once more without even. He didn't wait despite knowing what I would say. In search of a response, he stretched out and wiped a fog trail from the window with the just enough to see me in the palm of his hand. Enough so that I can see him, and the spark came from the way he looked at me. That's when we stopped talking. Didn't have to, because I was as certain as I'd ever had any knowledge that we didn't. No longer acting, the mirror was foggy. There were few lights, and the air in the bathroom felt quite thick. Was holding its breath, just as I was. Stood just past the steam's edge. Heart racing, unsure whether to move. Chris didn't turn away or get any closer. Move. Instead of drawing the curtain, he simply remained there with the water pouring down, observing me through the glass with his back, and I witnessed it, not only his body, but nakedness, but the expression in his eyes. Inquisitive, steady, is not shocked. Just open, you're still here. Dismissive, he said softly, without raising his voice. I nodded over the sound of the shower. You didn't shut the door slowly. He expelled a sound that was something between a sigh and a, perhaps I didn't want to laugh. My chest clenched as it flipped inside of me, with fear, yet something more profound, something akin to permission or relief. We had never discussed this before, never went over the line, but in this case enveloped in heat in this tiny area, and pause each line we drew across. The years started to fade as I got closer. My feet are moving gently and independently. As I passed through the fog, it changed, and all of a sudden, I was outside. He turned after looking into the glass, completely apologizing, making no effort to conceal the boy I had known since middle school. School was now fully revealed. He didn't flinch. He simply looked, without covering up. "Are you okay?" she questioned me. What a straightforward inquiry, but the weight of it struck right in the middle of my chest because, yep, I was more than okay. but it felt good to say that. Too little for my feelings. I don't understand what I'm saying, but I, not wanting to leave his lips alone, curved into the most kind grin, as if he had been anticipating those words. Perhaps even you don't have to, he said, hoping for them. Stated, my hand went to the side of the glass lying there as though it were the only I sensed something keeping me grounded. The water's heat coming from him and from an internal source that I'd never allow to emerge until he said, "Come in," and I did. The instant I entered the world outside the restroom, the steam disappeared. Closed all around us, the gentle beat of the only sound Chris could hear was water. Looking into my eyes with his hands in front of me. Hesitant, as if unsure of where to. I started by reaching for my fingertips. Touched his chest. He released his breath slowly. And constant. The water had heated his skin. Soft under my fingers, his heartbeat racing similar to mine, and his appearance not like a friend or someone at me curious, but like someone who at last realized why nothing had ever quite produced sense up until. When our lips finally touched, everything slowed. At first, the kiss was cautious and soft, created after years of never quite making sense. Until now, when our lips finally touched. Slowly. Initially, it was cautious and mild. Kiss that was created after years of recollections. Something fresh touched him, and his hand slid to my waist, clutching me as though he might thought of this but was afraid to ask. Drew closer to him, allowing the water to wash over us as we explored with our mouths, something that we both kept hidden beneath the surface. He gave me a kiss as if it meant he didn't seem to be scared of what may change, and I returned the kiss because. We stood there, each of us covered in wetness and heat. As our lips moved slowly, I could feel the waves of pain from his breath and hands, the way his forehead touched mine. They muttered my name as though it was the first time he had ever expressed it in that manner. Wasn't about passion, but rather identification and discovery. The gap between, we had always been too little, and he was gone now, and it wasn't there at all. We made contact as if we had done 1,000 times, times prior to a high five or shoulder bump and inebriated embrace, but this time it was different, purposeful. The water cooled down in the end. However, it wasn't until we were facing one another with moist bodies, and Chris whispered quietly as he flushed. I've always wondered how this would feel. Like. I kissed in response because. By the time we stepped, we both knew. After taking a shower, the restroom felt quieter, smaller, cooler, but packed with something we were still unable to call steam held onto the mirror and sank down gently. The tiles as though the space didn't wish to forget what was just occurred. My heart continued to race. From nerves, but from a deeper source, Chris gave me a towel and said something genuine. Silent. At first, I took it quietly. Warm, familiar fingertips touched mine. Yet, something has changed, and I wrapped in electric now. It pressed against my waist, and it takes a time for the sink to return to. He was standing close to a towel low on water flowing from his chest to his hips. I tried not to look at his tummy, but what use was it now that we had already passed the line? Felt the heat between us as we kissed. Boundary no longer existed, but terror, I just felt at ease, and I wanted to silent longing that was unnamed. In the mirror, Chris attracted my attention and grinned without taunting or a sneer. Sincere and secure, he said in a quiet voice. Although steady, I suppose we'll skip the bar. Chuckled quietly and shook my head. Indeed, I don't believe the threshold will. He leaned against the door on top of that. Crosswater with arms still clinging, I'm not sure what will happen to his skin. The ensuing quiet wasn't uncomfortable. Like neither of us wanted to, it was packed. Be the one to say the words that you're afraid of. Might be scared or break the charm. The conversation would make everything seem less. I finally had to inquire. Did you anticipate that? He asked after pausing. Not tonight, but I've thought about it. I cautiously turned the towel in his direction. How long? He asked, still twisted at my waist. Gave a tiny apologetic shrug, saying, I'm not sure, but it wasn't like thing. But it began infiltrating. I'd observed certain aspects of you. Try to ignore. However, it persisted. My breath. Not because I was afraid, but since it was just how I had felt. I didn't even aware I was saying, me too. It wasn't until earlier that I assumed it was nothing when I stepped in. But he stated that it wasn't, and I nodded. Chris approached cautiously and slowly, as if inspecting a floorboard, but he wasn't certain would hold. He halted before me close enough for me to sense his warmth. His hand raised and stopped in midair, then laid lightly on my chest. Right? I really do not want this to be a... He stated something once. Discreetly, and I don't want to attribute it to the heat, the shower, or the reality that I've known you for ages, so I stretched out and put a hand on his wrist. Keeping his hand solid where it was, don't both, I murmured into his gaze. So what now? Softened. I inhaled. Grinning, he said, You asked me to stay. Stay. A tiny smile pulled at his lips. Didn't waste time getting dressed, say a lot more either. We simply strolled to his bedroom as if it were the most organic. The lamp was already the most amazing thing. Warm and on low, the bed was a mess of sheets, as if they had been anticipating our arrival. We allowed our towels to drop with each. After some hesitation, I got into bed, skin-to-skin contact beneath the blanket's chilly weight, but it didn't feel hurried. It didn't seem careless. Felt like coming back, like discovering things we had both been keeping silent about. Looking for his arms encircling me, I cuddled into his chest and his waist. Hearing the languid cadence of his breath, he gave me a single forehead kiss, and held me as though he was still unable to think I was real, as if he was scared I may vanish. We lay there for a long time gently tracing with the fingertips, hands moving over ribs and noses on the backs, stroking cheeks in between silent kisses. Not to force a certain outcome, but since we. And in the middle of those slow, I became aware of the whispered names and touches. We rewrote instead of simply crossing a line. When I woke up, the entire map was illuminated by slipping over the bed already in warm stripes that gently shimmer against Chris's naked shoulder. I momentarily forgot. Perhaps I hadn't forgotten where I was. Perhaps I simply hadn't gotten used to what. This indicated that his arm was still at rest, our legs entangled under my waist. This is how we'd wrap the blanket. Always slept, but last night we weren't. Was the new, fragile electric clunky ideal? And the morning had now come like a calm question. Did it change, or was that real? Chris swirled everything next to me. Eyelids popped open, warm and drowsy. He didn't when he noticed me observing him. Morning, he whispered, giving a flinch. Morning. A little gap occurred, although not because we were at a loss for words. I simply didn't want to shatter it. Perhaps I had that dream, he muttered, stroking my side with his fingers. But you're still here, so I won't leave. I said, anywhere. And I meant it. Leaned closer and gave my lips a gentle kiss. Collarbone, where it remained for a... He seemed to need to sense my heartbeat to think that this was true. It was more than just the evening, simply physical. There was more to it. Something acquired through years of confidence and hand-brushing laughs on the couch sitting slightly too near. And now, we saw that I drew him nearer, allowing his weight to rest on me. It wasn't just the heat that made the skin warm, beneath the towels, but from the peaceful knew the truth between us. We continued to kiss gently like that, lips grazing flesh in between times like we were the only ones learning the language, could talk, and finally we stood up. Just two, no hurry, still no awkwardness. Individuals passing through an area they'd 100 times, but only now did it mean I saw him brushing something unusual. His teeth in boxers and a shabby-out tee. And I grinned broadly. He caught me in the mirror, and I was a fool. Questioned, keeping the toothbrush in his mouth. I said, just you. And he spat, washed and spun around in the same... Somehow, a boyish smile from junior high alive in the man I was currently seeing. You're such a jerk. You adore it. He answered, I do. without hesitation, thinking too much and just dropping it there like it was the most noticeable element in the world, and I was the one who crossed the restroom and gave him another kiss, the flavor of toothpaste. Additionally, he didn't pull away. Even so, we took a moment later that morning to sit at the coffee at the kitchen table in cozy quietness. I continued to take looks at him, the contour of his lips, the way his knee met the cup and remained motionless. "Are we telling people?" I inquired, being cautious not to shatter. The serene man arched an eyebrow as if to an announcement. I chuckled and said, "Number." Simply said, "Should we figure this out first?" Perhaps he nudged me with his foot while leaning in. "Just be ourselves under the table. Look where it is goes." I gave a nod, and suddenly my heart calmed. I hadn't experienced this feeling in years. It was odd how simple everything was. Seemed to be the only thing we would ever. What was lacking was the bravery to halt, look at each other in this manner, dismissing the intimacy and tension. The way our gazes occasionally linger, just when one of us laughed, it was a moment too long. We had consistently been something that I've never given it a name until now. I never thought I'd kiss someone. I've known for the majority of my life that I used to believe that it was natural and inevitable. The most successful partnerships began with mysterious sparks from a distance that gave everything a fresh, energetic feeling. However, nothing has ever felt more better than giving Chris a kiss since we weren't beginning with nothing. Entering a space that had silently been developing throughout the years between us, waiting for us to eventually observe how the remainder of the weekend became hazy, in a manner that seemed distinct, not because we were trying to escape reality, but since, in some way, there was nothing to explain. We didn't have a meaningful conversation, didn't specify it. We simply went through the hours as before, but now that between brushing and breakfast, they shared a kiss. We twisted our teeth under the toss. We touched each other while watching TV under blankets. Others' arms as if they held significance. Because it initially caused our on Saturday, the quiet felt full rather than empty. When darkness fell, I was meant to go home. My bag was half-zipped and sitting beside the door. It was aware that I wasn't actually going to. I hesitated to stand anywhere. Chris was unsure of what to say, and leaned against arms crossed and eyes closed in the bedroom doorway softly. "Are you staying or going?" His casually questioned, but his voice had that silent edge that claimed he was wishing just a single response, even if he wouldn't share it. "I'm not sure," I replied. Sincerely, he didn't ask, "Do you want me to?" He simply walked without grinning or smirking. Slowly, confidently, and wrapped over to me, putting his arms around my waist as he had. It's true that I dropped it 1,000 times. The bag and gave him a kiss, allowing everything I was unable to express emanate from the manner in which I held him. No longer felt fresh. Instead, it seemed like whatever we had at last given ourselves permission to name. We lay in bed later that evening. Once more, no completely behind the blankets, the fans whirring. The apartment above us is silent, like a Chris's cocoon rested on his side fingers, drawing patterns on my chest gently. After a while, he said, "I used to wonder," low voice, "why it didn't work with nobody else, not even the decent people. Ever I turned to face him and caught his eyes, but I was trapped. Yes, I agree. I believe it's because it wasn't you who struck more forcefully than I did. Anticipated. Not only because it was adorable, but since I had the same thought. Nearly verbatim more times than I might include every date on which I wished that I could just speak. To Chris, instead, I left someone all those nights. I initially texted him at someone else's apartment. I told myself all those tiny things. We were merely pals, but my heart was giving him more already. Perhaps I was always in love with him, but I didn't say, not yet, but I did get him nearer. Put my arms around him like if I had never desired to release and muttered against his skin, "We'll be all right, right?" Without hesitation, nodded, "Yes, we will be better than all right." And resting there while listening to his, I thought my breathing was dropping with mine. Since love doesn't always find him making a spectacular debut and crashing in. It has occasionally been seated directly next to giving you the remote control for years, taking fries from your plate while you're waiting for you to open your eyes at last, and once you see it, there's no turning back. Return. I appreciate you sticking to the very conclude if you found this story to be meaningful. Remember to like and share the video with a potential needy person and sign up for gay infidelity stories at any time. For more touching tales,